All right, what's up everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, aka Mr. Delks Moses, aka Mr. Anoints himself with grease, governed by caprice. Today is April 4th, 2025, and it's about 6:54 p.m. where I'm at right now. Coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary, we are continuing our reading of this powerful book by Neil MacMaster, a white Anglo-Saxon professor of history at East Anglia University, and this is his 2001 work, Racism in Europe, the History of Anti-Blackness and Anti-Semitism from 1870 to the year 2000. You can pick up this book on Amazon for the humble price of only $22.52 or $66.90 hardcover. Rare book to find, very informative book to find, and it's a book that is a primer. It's an introductory work to the study of blackness, white supremacy, white studies on the European continent. A lot of studies of anti-blackness and the history of race creation centers on the Americas, or positions it at only during the creation of the transatlantic slave trade, or countries that were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. But this book here expands that history, expands the theory of race creation to the European continent in a very powerful and informative way. Now, before we continue reading the book, because we left off on this section, the partition of Africa and racism, in our last live reading yesterday, we're going to jump into the YouTube comments. I will always read the YouTube comments before any book to react if we have any comments to any book to react video. So if you want me to reply to something, if you're not able to join the live stream, just put it in the comment section of one of the previous videos and we will get to it. We only have one new comment that I didn't get to read yesterday for the live stream, and it comes from Strong Mermaid 4651. And this is why I take all of my comments with a grain of salt, because I put my real face, my real name, my real ID out there. Because I'm willing to stand up to anybody on what I say and what I believe, and I believe everything I say with my whole heart, and I back it up with facts as well. Somebody named Strong Mermaid are going to leave a racist comment is somebody who is not a serious person, just off rip, just by reading his name. So let's go here. Go to Arabic nations or Asian countries, maybe it's you. I've said in previous videos, I have, and in every previous video that I've spoken about my journeys to Malaysia, Indonesia, North Africa like Tunisia or Qatar, I've spoken about the anti-blackness that's present there. So I have said that. And maybe it is me. Yes, it is me to some degree, because I am racialized as black in an anti-black white supremacist world, which is why we are reading these texts, which is why we are challenging white supremacy, which is why we are educating ourselves, and hopefully you will be educated as well. Stronger Mermaid 4651. Why do you demand that 16% of the world's population bow down and kiss your butt? Well, they should, number one, kiss my ass, my whole black ass, because I don't give a fuck what they think. I am not asking anybody to bow down and worship my big, black, beautiful cock. I'm not asking people to bend over and kiss my black ass. I'm not asking people, but if they were to do it, it would be in my rights. I am descended from the people that built the modern world. Modern capitalism, globalization, all the things that the world is built upon, the predicated wealth of centuries of people like me, human trafficked across continents, across land masses, across oceans. We're the foundation of building this world. So yes, kiss my entire black ass. And if my YouTube channel wouldn't get demonetized, I would show it to you, pull it down, and tell you to kiss my ass. Facts. But it's not, once again, about making people kiss my ass. It's not about making people be nice. It's about eliminating white supremacy, getting rid of anti-blackness, period. Period. That's what this is about. So that's the only comment that we have to get to before we jump into the text. Looking forward to reading a few sections of this book before I go out and do some more things with my life. I got a lot of work to do, a lot of writing to do, and go subscribe to Culturalist Theory, the channel I write for. Go subscribe to Backpack Bandits, my travel content with my wife, and let's get into this book to react series. The Partition of Africa and Racism. Was the transition after the 1860s to a more virulent form of anti-black racism peculiar to Britain, or was it a phenomenon shared by continental Europe? Part of the answer to this question can be found in the way that several nations, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Portugal, had a major stake in the drive towards the partition and rapid economic exploitation of Africa between 1875 and 1912. During the new age of imperialism, anti-black racist stereotypes stereotypes were powerfully reinforced through a mass of official and informal propaganda, from school textbooks and a cheap popular press to the work of missionaries and colonial exhibitors. Before examining this area in more detail, some note must be taken of the development of racism in the colonies and its impact on metropolitan societies. It was in the overseas empires that Europeans, either as permanent settlers or as more temporary administrators, judges, missionaries, soldiers, traders, and engineers, had the most sustained contact with Africans. While within Europe before 1914, anti-black racism in almost total absence of Africans developed mainly in a theoretical form. The colonies, as with the earlier slave plantations of the 17th and 18th centuries, provided the terrain in which racism grew in its most powerful and virulent forms, as a racial praxis grounded in military conquest, systematic violence, land dispossession, forced labor, and segregation. So, once again, they're talking about the scramble for Africa. Basically, many of the countries that were listed here, Britain, France, the Netherlands, etc., were involved in colonizing Africa. As we know, King Leopold of Belgium went to Congo and made people cut off the hands of the Africans who refused to collect rubber from the trees and things like that. France did horrible things as well, and neo-colonialism continues today. But during the end of the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, many people in Europe had no idea about real Africans, what black people were actually like, but they got messages from the colonialists who went to Africa and were able to collect some data. And then they twisted blackness around to make it seem like something negative. All right? Hold on one second. Got to make sure. Need it in 8. All right. So, anyway, continuing here with the reading. Between 1875 and 1912, the 7 rival nations, Germany, Italy, Portugal, France, Britain, Belgium, and Spain, partitioned a whole continent, created 30 new colonies and protectorates covering 10 million square miles of territory, and acquired 110 million new subjects. The process of colonization varied historically from one territory to another, but there were certain shared characteristics that can be illustrated by the German occupation of the Cameroons and Namibia, 1884 to 1914. In the Cameroons, the Germans had no hesitation in taking over enormous areas of the most fertile land, which was divided up into plantation concessions owned by various companies like the African Fruit Company and the German West African Company, controlled by financiers, bankers, and speculators in Hamburg, Berlin, and Bremen. The plantations could only be made profitable through an enormous labor input, but since the indigenous people were resistant to the harsh and intensive forms of work imposed by the overseers, the plantation companies resorted to a system of forced labor and brutality. So atrocious were the working conditions that 16% of men died on the Prince Alfred plantation during 1913. Wealthy bankers like Adolf von Hausmann and S. Bleichenroder invested in the German Southwest African Company that took over a huge Namibian concession in 1885, an area of 240,000 square kilometers. The seizure of hereditary cattle lands, the building of railway lines, and the development of mining eventually led to the Nama-Herero uprising of 1904 that lasted until 1907. This drawn-out guerrilla war was put down with the utmost savagery and a systematic repression that can be rightly described as genocidal. So before the Germans were doing genocide to the Jews and the Gypsies, they were doing it to black Africans for practice. Before World War I, before World War II, they were committing world war on Africans on the continent. And I'm very interested in the history of Namibia. It's a country that came into being the same year that I was born, 1990, right? So I'm very interested to learn more about the history of Namibia. I should watch that movie that they did about Namibia. The guy who directed the film we watched, I forgot the name, the one that we did with... oh my God, what's his name? The guy who played Mr. in Color Purple. I forgot his name. But he's in that film. He's in that film that the director who made the film that we reviewed with the guy who played Mr. in Color Purple, whose name escapes me right now. He's in the Namibian film. Sorry for that. I went off. Let me stay back on task. The picture was much the same throughout Africa. A disregard for native land rights, the brutal use of superior technical and military power to impose the settlers' will, the dislocation of indigenous societies, and a low evaluation of African life. The unspeakable atrocities committed in the Belgian Congo represented the most publicized example of a more generalized and often unrecognized abuse of human rights. Although voices of opposition were raised in Europe by socialists, missionaries, and humanist liberals in condemnation of the worst excesses, in general, European governments utilized a two-track deployment of state power between colony and metropolis that accepted forms of colonial repression and control, native codes, legal segregation, banning of trade unions, absence of political rights, harsh penalties for minor offenses, military violence. That would have been found absolutely intolerable within the bounds of metropolitan society as a breach of fundamental human and democratic rights. One of the most powerful quotes I've heard recently is that fascism is when colonialism happens to Europeans. Basically, everything that we consider fascist, losing political rights, harsh penalties for minor offenses, no freedom of speech, the government having all control, no real elections, right? That's basically colonialism. So I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of black folks, when we hear about the rising of fascism all across the West, we're like, oh, you're talking about colonial South Africa? You're talking about colonial Nigeria? You're talking about Jim Crow segregation in America? You're talking about the unspoken apartheid in Brazil? That's what you're talking about? So continuing here. A key point to note here is that most of those Europeans who were posted to Africa, whether as government officials, soldiers, teachers, or company workers, lived and operated within a colonial system of values and practices that they often absorbed or internalized from the demeaning way that whites spoke to or treated servants, to public whippings and elaborate codes of segregation or racial abuse, wag, the N-word, or French expressions like bougnoul, raton, and bico. I never even heard those. Those are new slurs. From diaries and letters, we know that many Europeans were, on first arrival in the colonies, initially shocked by the treatment of blacks, but admitted to a process of gradual habituation. But most crucial of all, colonial societies in Africa, as had the earlier slave societies of the Caribbean and the United States, elaborated the most stark racial ideologies to legitimate even the most brutal acts. For example, it was a commonplace perception, upheld by colonial medical science, that the black body showed muscular strength, but was deficient in the refined sensory nervous system and brain power of the European. Blacks, in an animalistic way, were far more resistant to pain and hardship. This meant that physical punishment needed to be more harsh to make any impact on their brutish being. In 1904, Lutwine, the governor of German Southwest Africa, in a report on the physical punishment of blacks, claimed that with the leathery skin of the natives, the Hottentot, as well as the Kaffirs, even 25 strokes caused but a slight sensation of pain. Similarly, it was thought that the native had far fewer needs and was happy to survive on a frugal diet, thus legitimating lower wage levels. So, this is a common belief that people have. I remember when I first met Acti said something to the degree that black people are naturally stronger, right? I've heard other people say that black people have thicker skin. Literally, our skin is thicker than other groups of people. Black people are, naturally athletic. We have these naturally God-given abilities to jump high, run fast, and lift heavy things. These are beliefs that still permeate today. There are people that still believe black people naturally have larger penis, but if you essentialize blackness as human characteristics of strength and agility, then naturally you're also going to make those types of assumptions about intelligence as well. And that is one of the major problems. Also, one of the major problems of this continuing belief of the black body being stronger than other forms of humanity is that it ends up with black folks suffering more pain, as in physical pain. There have been black people who go to hospitals in the U.S. and they report that they're feeling pain or that they are having complications with their surgery and whatever, and the doctors don't believe them. And that comes from the inherent bias that black people are naturally feeling less pain. That when they say they're feeling pain, it's not as much pain as when a white man says he's feeling pain, or the white woman is saying she's feeling pain. Continuing here. Such deeply entrenched racial attitudes and assumptions were brought back into European society by returning ex-colonials. Many of those who served in the colonies, apart from rank-and-file soldiers drawn from the working class, belonged to an educated and trained elite. Civil engineers, lawyers, army officers, doctors, administrators, company managers, professors, who, on their return to Europe, continued to be employed in important and influential positions, from which they could spread racist attitudes as educators, government officials, or members of imperial leagues. It was precisely because ex-colonials had a detailed experience of Africa that they could lay claim to a special expertise in native management and related matters, so that they carried particular weight in European society as advisors to colonial departments, leading politicians, government commissions, and other policy-making fora. Perhaps the most deeply entrenched attitude which colonials brought back into European society was a horror of miscegenation and of sexual relations between even the small numbers of blacks in Europe and white women. Although much research remains to be done on the scale and impact of ex-colonials within European society, including into the post-colonial circulation of imperial elites as a crucial element in the elaboration of racism in Europe. This process was to accelerate, as will be noted in Chapter 6, with decolonialization and the return home of many hundreds of thousands of settler and officials who felt bitter at their displacement by Africans. Shout out to Kamal jumping into the chat with the thumbs up. Shout out to everybody who's going to watch this on the playback. So once again, Neil MacMaster is writing here that during the age of colonialism, the white folks that were sent from France, the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, etc., to go into Africa and administer the colonies, developed quickly the anti-black attitudes, even if at first they were repulsed by the signs of, black people being in chains or enslaved or slaughtered by the hundreds, with children, being murdered right in front of their eyes. They were first appalled, but then they slowly were socialized to view the black person as less than human in the colony. And continuing on, it didn't end when colonialism was at its worst at the beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 19th century, when the black people of Africa actually took back their countries and were forming their own nation states, and many of the whites left. Many of the colonial administrators were pushed out. They were very bitter. And they went back to Europe and started using more racial animus against black people in their language with other white Europeans. Going now to the comment sections, Jay says, do you ever get tired of talking about race? I have to ask you, Jay, do you ever get tired of being a white man racist against black people? Because I'm never tired of reading. I'm never tired of educating myself. I come from a lineage of people who are educators, who are educated people, who are teachers, who are doctors, who are lawyers, who are continuing to advance and shine and be grateful and graceful as handsome, melanated black people. Jay, I have to ask, are you tired? Do you ever get tired of being a small dick white man? Of being a small dick white man who is racist against black people? Let me know, Jay. Going out to Ozzy. He says, shout out to Comrade Hill. Salute to you. Shout out to Ozzy as well. Ozzy says, where are you from? Are you black? Jay is not black. There is no way a black person would say that. I've never heard a black person say, are you tired of talking about race? That's like asking Martin Luther King, are you tired of dreaming? Simon Hill Keeps It Trill will always talk about whatever the fuck I want to talk about on this channel, baby. Because I keep it real, I keep it trill. All right? Colonialism never really ended. Facts. There's a book I want to read. In fact, I might drop it in the chat for all y'all. This is a very dope book that I picked up today. I found it online. I stumbled upon it. And it's a text by Kwame Nkrumah, and it's titled Neo-Colonialism. It's titled Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism by Kwame Nkrumah. Y'all check that out. Check that out. It's a very dope book as well. All right, and if you don't know who Kwame Nkrumah was, he was the first president of Ghana after they gained liberation, and my government, the USA, killed him, okay? Mad Villainy says, peace, peace. Shout out to Mad Villainy. Haven't heard from you in a while. Wow, what's going on? Shout out to Louisiana up in the building. Jay says, I'm black. I'm from Los Angeles and I live in Prague. Love my black people. Really, Jay? If you love black people, then why would you come in here to this educational black channel saying white supremacist talking points? Jay is the type of black man who's just in Europe to pog. Jay is the type of black man who is just in Europe to pog. Jay is the only black man in Prague who is only there to pog. He's not there to educate himself like all the other Africans that are going to school. He's not there to actually better himself and form a business like some of the other black folks that are trying to be entrepreneurial. He is just a man who came to pog. And pogging is not wrong. All right? Jay says, you seem triggered, and I was just asking him, speaking about race gets tiring. I have a Turkish girlfriend, and you have a Turkish wife. So, nigga. So, nigga. So, yes, I'm triggered when stupid motherfuckers come into the live stream and they don't read. I'm triggered when motherfuckers come into the live stream and just say stupid shit and have nothing to say about the text. Jay is the type of nigga that has never read a book, which is why I do these live streams for you niggas. Because all of y'all are on TikTok all day just watching big booty women twerking and not reading anything, not educating yourself, not growing your minds at all. Jay is a nigga who is just in Prague to pog. Jay the pogger in Prague. Jay the pogger in Prague. Not a reader. We gonna let you pog in peace in Prague, Jay. But yes, we are triggered by stupid niggas who talk shit like this. Who gives a fuck what I do with my dick? I have sex with my big booty Turkish wife, and we are here reading books. Y'all are obsessed with a black man's penis. Get off my dick, comrade. Anyway, continuing here. The remaining parts of this chapter looks in part at the ways in which anti-black stereotypes were disseminated in popular culture after 1870 through the mass media, schooling, missionary propaganda, and other channels, reaching into even those regions, peasant societies, and provincial backwaters in which there was no black presence. However, the main emphasis is placed on the little-known history of a small but very significant European-wide black minority presence during this early period, and what can be learned from this about changing white racial attitudes within European society. Particular attention is given to the direct exhibiting of blacks within the great international or colonial affairs, as well as in traveling shows, as providing an insight into the construction of racist messages that had a major impact on the viewing public. All right, so I think what we're going to get into now is the human zoos. In almost every European capital city, they had human zoos where black people were displayed as animals in their natural environment. So let's go here. The black presence in Europe. It is often assumed that the black presence in Europe is a relatively recent phenomenon as product of post-1945 labor shortage and governmental recruitment of colonial immigrants. However, migration of blacks into Europe, particularly of slaves, had existed on some scale since the 16th century. In Lisbon in 1551, there were 9,950 slaves. Let's repeat. For people that say there was never anti-black racism in Europe and that slavery never happened in Europe, we're going to start here. We're starting, baby. Lisbon, 1551. 9,000, almost 10,000 black people in chains on the European continent. Did y'all know that? Bet y'all didn't know that. I bet motherfuckers like Jay didn't know that there were 10,000 black people in chains in Lisbon. Didn't know that. Most of them were Africans, comprising 1/10 of the city's population. While in Seville in 1565, there were 6,327 black bodies, women, children, men, chained up, forced to work as slaves on the European continent in Spain. Did y'all know that? Y'all want to talk about, do you ever get tired of talking about race? Do you ever get tired of learning something? Do y'all ever get tired of learning? Do y'all ever get tired of learning? We don't. Continuing here. Thus, in the mid-16th century, the Iberian Peninsula already had a black presence that was not to be exceeded for the whole of Europe until after 1914. During the 18th century, similar permanent slave communities built up further north in the major Atlantic ports, from Bordeaux and Nantes to London, Bristol, Liverpool, and Amsterdam. During this period, the number of blacks probably reached a peak of 5,000 black people in France and 20,000 in Britain. There was even a distinctive community of blacks in the Caucasus Mountains. In the Caucasus Mountains. There was a community of black people in the Caucasus Mountains near the Black Sea, probably descendants of Turkish slaves which survived into the Soviet era. I don't know if people like Jay are listening. I don't know if y'all are out there listening and soaking up all this history, all this knowledge about our ancestors who walked this continent in chains before we showed up. Let's honor our ancestors, all the lives that were lost and stolen by the hated. Let's soak this in, man, because those are staggering numbers. There was even a distinctive community of blacks in the Caucasus Mountains near the Black Sea, probably descendants of Turkish slaves which survived into the Soviet era. Fascinating history. Fascinating history. All right. Hold on one second. Let me handle some business. We're going to keep going, man, but soak up that game. All right. All right. So let's go here. As the slave trade was gradually terminated, so the inward movement of Africans that fed into the port communities was ended, and the black population that has settled permanently appears, over the course of the 19th century, to have gradually melded through intermarriage with Europeans, and to have disappeared as an identifiable minority. However, from the 1860s onwards, the displacement of sail by steam led to the practices of shipping lines hiring cheap labor in the ports of India, Africa, Arabia, and elsewhere to undertake low-skilled but physically demanding jobs like boiler stoking. The non-European sailors that were abandoned by shipping lines in European ports or who jumped ships gradually began to settle and build up permanent port communities, several of which became the historic core of the oldest ethnic settlements surviving today, most notably in Marseille, London, Cardiff, Liverpool, Amsterdam, and Hamburg. As colonial conquests and trade accelerated, so did the number of Africans and black Americans coming into European ports. A sizable and multi-ethnic community of Indians, Chinese, Somalis, and Africans began to put down roots in London, Cardiff, Glasgow, and elsewhere in Britain. There was a similar multi-ethnic presence in Marseille, a major port of call for shipping passing through the Suez Canal. There were numerous black seamen in Hamburg by the 1890s, as well as in the Russian ports of Archangel, St. Petersburg, Nikolaev, Kronstadt, and Vladivostok. United States shipping records show that 132 ships indicated as bound for Russia between 1798 and 1880. There was rarely one that did not have at least one black seaman on board. Soak that in, man. There were black folks going to Russia doing work, doing business. Doing business, man. This is amazing. This is amazing history. I didn't even know about this. I didn't hear about this before. I heard about the black folks in the Caucasus because I did a little bit of research about the Turkish slave trade, how they trafficked black bodies for a longer period of time than the Americans did. I've learned about that, so I knew that there were some black folks in the Caucasus and in the Balkans as well, and also all throughout Turkey and the Middle East. But I did not hear about these black folks up in Russia doing business, doing trade. Interesting. Of the 12-man crew of the Black Chaska of Boston that arrived in Kronstadt in 1869, 9 were black Americans. Wow. Blacks would have been a not uncommon sight on the quays and in the streets and inns of all the major seaports of the Atlantic and Mediterranean coast. Inland from the ports of Europe, blacks would have been a rare sight. Indeed, it seems unlikely that the majority of Europeans, particularly those who lived in rural communities or small towns and who rarely traveled beyond the provincial capital or region, would ever have seen a black person. However, the great cities of Europe did see the passage of a tiny but significant number of blacks after the 1860s, especially as the spread of railway lines and the commercialization of mass leisure, theaters, dance halls, political meetings made it possible for black actors, jockeys, boxers, and students to circulate. During the colonization of Africa after 1870, young black men who were regarded as particularly gifted by administrators or missionaries were sent for training in Britain, France, Germany, and Russia. Numerous black American abolitionist speakers went on tour through Europe in the 1860s, like T. Morris Chester, who was received by the Tsar in 1867 and then traveled on through Denmark, Sweden, Saxony, and England. The famous Shakespearean actor Ira Aldridge performed widely in Britain from 1825 onwards, before touring the continent in 1852 and 1858. Visiting cities in Belgium, Germany, Bohemia, Austria, Hungary, Poland, and Russia. He again toured Moscow and provincial Russia in 1861 through 1866, and finally died on the road in Lodz in Poland in 1867. Quite amazing, man. I love hearing these stories about black folks who were doing what was considered the impossible back then. Go in here. All right, Ozzy says, very interesting. You rarely hear about black people in Eastern Europe. Facts. I mean, they think that, we just showed up recently in the modern age with the invention of airplanes. But black people were all over this planet. Before the white man even showed up, we had colonized the entire planet before. We have been here before and will be here much after the white man leaves. We will be here longer after the white man leaves. We started this world and will end this world. And that's what I honestly believe. I've never said that on Livestream before, but that's what I honestly believe. I truly believe we are the original people. Who is the original man? The Asiatic black man, the maker, the owner, the cream of the planet Earth, father of civilization, God of the universe. Facts, facts, facts. Every continent, every landmass on this planet had black feet on it before the white man was even born. Facts. So us being in Russia, being in Hungary, being in Poland, being in Bohemia, anywhere, it should not be new to us. This planet is ours. This planet is ours. This planet is ours. Continuing here. African slaves had also been servants and entertainers in the royal courts of Europe since the 13th century, and this fashion then spread into the nobility as exotic symbols of wealth and status. Peter the Great of Russia, for example, procured a number of black servants, including the great-grandfather of Pushkin, Abraham Petrovich Hannibal, who had been captured by the slavers in Abyssinia in about 1700. In 1753, the philosopher David Hume remarked, "There are Negro slaves dispersed all over Europe. Although this fashion may have gone into decline in Western Europe after 1800 as the movement for the abolition of slavery gathered pace, the Imperial Russian court continued to retain a permanent staff of about 20 black servants right down to the Revolution." Interesting. Interesting. So don't let people tell you there was no racism, there was no anti-black racism in Russia. They had black slaves. There were black slaves in Russia. At the same time, there were black folks doing business and trade. A favorable subject of the 18th century portrait painters was of the noblewoman attended by her black servant, often a little boy, who served not only as a symbol of wealth, but also as a contrast to enhance the whiteness of the mistress's skin. This genre continued in French painting to the end of the 19th century, as in Edouard Manet's famous Olympia in 1863. And throughout this period, the black maid or servant continued to be a fashion accessory. In England, with the abolition of slavery in 1833, African servants were no longer so fashionable or as easy to acquire, but an identical role continued to be played by the thousands of black servants and ayahs, nurses, introduced by the British Raj from India and from Southeast Asia. All right. Kamal says, the face of humanity. Facts. Facts. All right. Ozzy says, we really have no allies. Ain't that the truth? We have no allies. All we have is ourselves, man. All we have is ourselves. Well, let's continue here. Throughout Europe, between 1870 and 1914, there was thus a small but nonetheless significant black presence, largely confined to the major ports and cities. Although small in number, however, they would often have received considerable publicity as speakers, actors, musicians, and sportsmen, and lectured or performed before large audiences of the European middle class. How do Europeans react to such a black presence? Here, we need to distinguish between two levels, the reactions of the middle class and aristocracy and that of the working class. As far as the latter is concerned, the main zone of contact was in the major ports, and in general, the number of black Africans or Afro-Americans was far too small for them to be perceived as economic competitors or a social threat. Black Africans were, however, during this period, only one group among the numerous ethnic minorities that could be found in European port settlements, from Chinese and Bengalis to Kabylias and Arabian Arabs. Indigenous hostility towards blacks was part and parcel of a generalized dislike of colonial seamen, regarded as inherently inferior. Just before the First World War in 1910, French seamen in Marseille went on strike against the employment of Kabyles by the merchant navy. Kabyles are another word for black people, by the way. While between 1910 and 1912, Italian immigrant workers in the oil refineries fought with North Africans brought in as strike breakers. In 1913, Kabyle workers came under attack again from Belgian immigrants in the coal miners of northern France. The Netherlands Seamen Trade Union in 1911 also objected to the increase of Chinese labor in Rotterdam and Amsterdam. Let me look this up because, it just hit my mind. The Kabyles might be the indigenous people of like northern Algeria. Yeah, I'm sorry. The Kabyles are like this lady here, and I don't think she will be racialized as black. So basically, the light-skinned Arabs of Algeria and Tunisia are what we would call Kabyles, right? But still, it's a type of anti-blackness because, once again, we're going to be there. At this time, Europeans were calling everything that they didn't like or anything not them the other black, right? We spoke about this in the live stream I did about being black and British. If I didn't mention this, the author went into a meeting of black people of Britain in like the early 1970s, and he walked in there and found nothing but Southeast Asians. Right when the Australians showed up in when the Australian criminals showed up from Britain and they met the indigenous people there, they called them black as well. Right? So continuing here, Matt Villainy says, in my opinion, brothers need to stick together even though we may disagree politically or whatever. Belgium and black people in 1913, what a horrible mix. I don't understand what you're trying to say here, Jerry Online. Fill that in. I went to Belgium. I went to Brussels and I liked it. Brussels is ill. Brussels is an ill city. I enjoyed my time in Brussels because it's black as hell and I loved it. Continuing here. So this economically based hostility, which began to take on a racist tone, was a forewarning of a major wave of anti-colonial prejudice that was to develop during the First World War. However, the predominant reaction of the European working class on catching sight of the rare black person in the street or bar appears to have been one of curiosity, a naive fascination with skin color and frizzy hair. The black British writer A.B.C. Merriam-Laber, in an account on his personal experience in late 19th century London, noted that the most hostile reception came from white children in the street. Bad boys will not hesitate to shower stones or rotten eggs on any passing black man. Sounds like Albania. They will call you all kinds of names. Sounds like Albania. Sing you all sorts of songs. Sounds like Albania. Or from adults in working class suburbs, like the factory girls that might shout, "Go wash your face, governor," or sometimes call out, "N-word, N-word, N-word." That literally happened in Albania. Some things never change. Ozzy says, I don't know if the book has talked about it, but gypsies are a perfect example of anti-blackness in Europe, especially Eastern European countries like Slovakia. Shout out to Ozzy for that very, very good question. See, that's how you formulate a question. Ozzy, the truth. Ozzy is the truth. Anyway, the book has mentioned the Romani people to some degree, but Neil MacMaster is making the point to focus on anti-blackness because it's such an understudied topic, as well as tying it to anti-Semitism, which will come up later, right, in this text. But I would say this, in the introduction of the book, he brought up the fact that the Europeans have been practicing the types of ill treatment that they did to black folks in the Americas against the Romanis, against the Jews, against all sorts of people, even their own women, for hundreds of years before they made it to us, if that makes sense. So, continuing here. All right. Jerry Online says, I mean, like historically, like hearing any article regarding black people in Belgium being involved in like the 1900s is always a tough read. I mean, yeah. I mean, Belgium was the home of one of the worst African colonies, you know, the Free State of Congo by Leopold. So yeah, it's hard to hear about Belgium and black folks together, right? But that's a part of just being black in this world. I mean, we're hated in this world. That's just a part of the facts. Let's continue here. So, from the diaries and correspondence of educated Africans and, in particular, of black Americans, it is possible to piece together an interesting picture of middle-class and aristocratic reactions. In England, there is evidence of hostility from the urban elites that had absorbed the prejudices of the Caribbean plantocracy or of the ideas of race science. For example, the deep revulsion against black males having any relationship with white women came to the fore in 1833, when the great American actor Ira Aldridge, playing Othello in London, opposite Ellen Tree, was subjected to a racist campaign in the press as the unseemly N-word. I'm not pussy. I can say the N-word, and I do say the N-word in my regular life, but YouTube always demonetizes me when I say it, so that's why I don't say it on stream. Plus, y'all can read it for yourselves. So, this actor, Ira Aldridge, who was a black man playing Othello, was called the N-word, and who, it was claimed, pawed the white actress, meaning that he put his hands on the white woman in front of the whole crowd. When blacks face discrimination and objection to their presence in the same hotel or as parts of mixed black and white couples in the streets, this was frequently from visiting white Americans who brought with them the racist values of the South. Down to the 1860s, visiting black Americans reported a general climate of tolerance in Britain, but from then onwards noted a distinct change in public attitudes towards an increasingly aggressive racism. This, as has been noted above, coincided with a general change towards a more negative racist ideology during the age of imperial expansion, social Darwinism, and nationalist xenophobia. Elsewhere in Europe, outside the ports, the bourgeoisie response to the black presence appears to have been quite positive. In Russia, the patronage of black servants and artists by the Tsar and the nobility provided them with a high level of social approval and protection. It was possible for such servants whose children had access to education to rise to high positions, like Michael Egyptios, who attained high rank in the Navy, or George Thomas, who amassed a fortune through the ownership of hotels and restaurants. Ira Aldrich was lionized in St. Petersburg and Moscow in the 1860s, while the whole town of Lodz turned out for his funeral in 1867. Pushkin's black ancestry never seems to have presented a problem as far as his social acceptance was concerned. Likewise, African students who arrived in Germany in the 1890s from the Cameroons and then married German women and put down roots achieved a respected position in society and suffered little racism before the 1930s. Very interesting stuff. Going out to the comments here. Jerry Online says, Kamal says, thanks for highlighting Albania. I've been there and didn't think the racism was that blatant. Well, that's everybody's experience. But what we don't do as black folks is discount other black people's experiences. I've never been lynched, but I would never say lynchings never happened. Ozzy says, you were in the capital, Tirana. I've heard that racism is worse in Tirana than other cities, which is weird considering Tirana in the main city. Y'all saw it on video, man, getting called N-words on camera, seeing the N-word, spray painted on walls. In every city I went to, got called the N-word. All right, Matt Villainy says, say ninjas, that's what I do. I just don't speak racial epithets at all on a personal level. Okay. Say ninjas. Okay, I might switch that because we need to take that word out of our vocabulary, man. We need to stop that. Anyway, what can we conclude from this apparent enlightenment? The evidence is patchy, but it can be surmised that the further east one moved in Europe from the seaboard, the more a black presence was limited to a tiny elite of educated servants and performing artists towards whom the public held quite tolerant ideas. Moreover, the Central and East European states, Poland, Austria, Hungary, Russia, Czechoslovakia, had little or no maritime colonial tradition and few connections to a colonial praxis that could impinge on society through commercial interests, settler links, and imperial propaganda. Hence the anomaly that the most autocratic or conservative of regimes in Tsarist Russia, Wilhelmine Germany, and Austro-Hungarian monarchy showed few traces of anti-black prejudice. The apparent toleration of Africans was barely distinguishable from the centuries-old courtly tradition that retained blacks as favored pets and exotic trophies. So we're going to wrap up this live stream here. We're going to finish reading here. We'll pick up on this next section. I know it seems we're going slowly in this book, but we're breaking it down piece by piece. We're going to do the live streams every day, so don't worry. But we have a lot of good comments in here, and I want to shout out everybody that showed up for today. Mad Villainy, shout out to you. Shout out Ozzy. Shout out Kamal. Shout out Jerry Online. Shout out Jay. Shout out everybody that turned up and turned out. It was good chatting with y'all. Y'all be easy out there. Pick up this book if you haven't already. Let me know some other books you think I should read and put them in the comments as well. And remember, every time we do one of these book reacts, we're going to read the comments from yesterday first. So if we refresh the page, we're going to see the comments right here. And we'll react to those before we do anything else. Sorry, my internet is so slow. I got all sorts of people here online sucking up my Wi-Fi that I pay for. I pay for it. Okay, so we got some comments here. Either way, we'll check this out next time we meet. And y'all be easy. Y'all be easy.